Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Trust Yourself. In this episode, I'm going to be telling the story about my journey through spring 2022 as a sophomore in college, through backpacking Europe for the first time and beginning to write on the internet. So let's back up to the origin of all of this, which was the email I sent to my therapist at the end of the last episode. So if you missed the last episode, I ended it with the story of my sexual performance issues with my girlfriend, leading me to sending an email to a therapist who I found out about through a friend out of desperation, basically saying, like, I don't know what's wrong with me, I need help. And that decision to choose to say I needed help was the crux point, the inflection point of my entire personal development journey. So around this time, after I sent that first email and set up an appointment, it was the first time I got to open up to somebody fully in my life, and it was such a beautiful experience to just have somebody who could sit there and listen without judgment, without bias, without necessarily trying to fix anything at the time, and without a preconceived idea of who I was. This was a woman, I'm going to say her name, Diana, an incredible human, and she just saw me in a way that nobody had seen me to that point, maybe except that girlfriend in high school, the soulmate type connection, who I always believed saw me for who I truly was in my essence before I was all these different labels of football player, D1, Northwestern, all these different labels. And this woman, Diana, this therapist, she was able to see me beneath all of that. And it started to help me see myself beneath all of those self-proclaimed labels that everybody projected upon me, and then I defined my own self-worth by. And I got to talk about the deepest insecurities I had, and I was met with nothing but just love and acceptance. And I was able to talk about family, and I was able to talk about binge eating and smoking weed and escapism and all the things that I was suffering from, to this older, wiser woman who just listened. Mainly, she didn't have to say much. I would go in there and I would just ramble for an hour. And that was beneficial for me to just sort my mind out, because there was so much chaos going on in my mind. And if we don't go and share that with somebody, it gets stored up there and we lose our sense of reality. And that's what was happening to me. So by talking with her, it just allowed me to start to order my thoughts and order my mind around who was I and what's the type of person I want to be. And I remember we did a 3 core values exercise, or we did a value pyramid exercise. And I remember my number 1 core value being freedom. And I never actually thought about what are my values up until that point. But once the exercise was underway, it became clear to me I valued freedom above anything else. And so that started to flip my mind in terms of what do I actually want out of my life. So around this time, I'm beginning to read, I'm beginning to journal, I'm beginning to meditate. I think I was saying in the last video, I was doing a 20-minute meditation every morning. I was reading books called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind, The Power of Now, 12 Rules for Life, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and some Stoic philosophy I was starting to get into. And I was starting to notice, whoa, I'm pretty curious. Whoa, I actually like reading and writing. I didn't know writing yet. I was journaling a little bit, to myself, just as self-care, essentially. But I was beginning to realize I kind of like this stuff. So in this same time where I'm starting to expand my curiosity, I'm starting to listen to some podcasts as well. And so I start listening to a lot of Joe Rogan. That was my slippery slope into everything. And I start to listen to a few different characters that were very instrumental for me. So 2 of them are football players and 2 of them are psychedelic explorers. And actually the football players are psychedelic explorers too. So the 2 football players were Aaron Rodgers and Pat McAfee. So Aaron Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. And Pat McAfee is was an incredible NFL punter. And now he's a really good talk show host basically for the NFL. Super funny character, personality. I'd recommend looking him up. And so Pat McAfee, there was a video on YouTube, don't know how I came across it, but somehow psychedelic mushrooms were beginning to enter my awareness. It could have been through Joe Rogan first, and then Pat McAfee, I love to listen to his show. He had a video, like an 8-minute clip on YouTube, and he was like, I did a mushroom trip my sophomore year of college in my dorm room, and it was the number one reason I made it to the NFL. And at this time, I'm still like, I want to go to the fucking NFL. I want to go transfer to a D3 school, play quarterback, and I had this master plan that I was eventually going to come back, transfer to a D1, and go to the NFL like 5 years later and prove everybody wrong. And when he said that mushrooms were the reason he got into the NFL, I was like, that's so fucking interesting. Like, I've always had this desire for like deep change back to freshman year football, where I would like literally say, this is the day I'm going to change, and I never would. I was like, maybe mushrooms are that transformation point for me, so I can completely align myself and I can completely get focused and get on this journey to the NFL. Also, Aaron Rodgers was talking a little bit about mushrooms, and he was talking about something called ayahuasca, which to me was like, I will never do that, which we'll see doesn't come true a few years later. But with these football players talking so openly about mental health and psychedelics, it started to open my awareness more, because these were guys who were in the world that I knew. They were guys I looked up to in the world I knew, and they became this bridge to the other part of a world that I was just starting to get into. And so I started to research a little bit into these psychedelic mushrooms. I was curious. And I started listening to two people in particular that stand out. One was a guy named Paul Stamets. So Paul Stamets is like a mushroom explorer, mushroom scientist. He's really biologist type of guy. And he had a podcast with Joe Rogan where he told an incredible story about how when he was like 20 years old, he had suffered from a speech impediment his whole life. And that was similar to me of my sexual performance anxiety, being like something I couldn't overcome mentally. And so he would like get so nervous talking to people, he could never hold a real conversation. And he had this crazy mushroom journey when he was 20 where he took like 8 grams of mushroom, which is just insane. And he climbed to the top of a tree in the middle of a forest while it was pouring rain. And he was like, I think like 50 to 100 feet in the air, holding onto this tree. And like lightning was striking the tree while he's on it on mushrooms. And like he came to the conclusion in that moment that he was done having a speech impediment forever. And it disappeared. He said the next day, or like maybe it was the same day, he walked past the cute girl that he'd always get nervous to talk to. And he said, hello, how are you? Without stuttering for the first time in his life. And so I heard that story and I heard him talk more and more about mushrooms. And I was like, oh, maybe 1, it's my way to get to the NFL. And 2, it's the way to solve my sexual performance anxiety. That's super interesting. So I was like, let me keep doing more research. And so that took me to a man named Michael Pollan, who has written a book called How to Change Your Mind, like on the power of plant medicines and psychedelics. And he had a Netflix series called How to Change Your Mind. And I watched that Netflix series, particularly the episode about psilocybin, mushrooms. He also has episodes in there about MDMA, LSD, and mescaline, which are also cool episodes. And LSD was interesting for me to see that at the time and kind of opened my awareness to something I thought, oh, that's just bad. And then I'm seeing it in a different light. Same with MDMA. But the psilocybin one started to open me up to it even more. And so I didn't really know anybody who had done mushrooms up to this point. I had a few friends from high school who had like experimented with mushrooms and LSD in high school, like pretty young at like 16, but I wasn't the type of kid that was going to be open to that yet, which I'm grateful for, that it waited until I was like 20, or like my higher self knew that I was supposed to wait until I was 20. But now I'm getting curious because I'm in a place of desperation for the first time. I'm like desperate to change. The desperation sent me to therapy. The desperation sent me down the rabbit holes to look into mushrooms. The desperation sent me to the podcast with Rogan and Paul Stamets and Aaron Rodgers and Pat McAfee. So, and the reading and the meditation and the journaling, it was all from a place of, I need to change. I want to change so bad. I'm so fed up with where I am at. So around spring break 2022, this is when things really start to shift. And it makes me excited to think about this time because it was so beautiful. And I took a trip for the first time in my life that spring break by myself to California, to San Francisco area, to visit my friend Carl, my best friend in college at the time. And that was the first time I ever got on a plane by myself. And like, I fucking loved it. I loved it. I felt so free. I was journaling. I was reading on the plane. I was in the airport. I was starting to like this. I'm like, oh, I feel so cool. I got a backpack. I got a suitcase. I'm in the airport by myself. Let's fucking go. And so I went on that trip with him, and it was a great time. We did some hikes. We spent time with his family. We saw his old football team. It was a really good time. And I ended up coming back home that Friday. So I was going to go back to school, I believe on Monday or Tuesday. But my sister's spring break just happened to be the next week. And so she was doing her like senior spring break trip and for high school. And so her, my parents, and my dad were leaving to go to Mexico on that Friday morning until the next Friday. And so I think I got back Thursday, and I ended up driving them to the airport Friday. And now, what I didn't mention yet is that before I came back for spring break, I hit up my my drug dealer basically, and the guy I used to buy weed from, and me and my friends would buy weed from in college, and I got mushrooms from him. He had mushrooms, and I think I got 2.5 grams of mushrooms because that, like, I was doing research on Reddit and like all these crazy things, and I was like, 2.5 grams seems like a good thing. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna do it because I know I'm gonna be home after spring break alone, and I'm gonna do it. And that Friday morning, I drove my parents to the airport. I came back and I got McDonald's. I ate like a egg McMuffin, and I knew I'm gonna go home and do mushrooms by myself. And I had a really good friend, Joey, in my town who I had like on text dial, speed dial. I was like, yo, bro, just to let you know, I'm gonna be doing mushrooms by myself. Like, in case anything happens, I'm gonna text you or call you. So I was wise enough to say that, but I ended up not needing it. I ended up being completely okay. And I'm going to just say this, like, disclaimer, I'm not saying to go do mushrooms. I'm not going to say to do psychedelics, but I'm saying to follow your curiosity, be wise, talk to people who have done it, and consult yourself and ask, does this really feel right for me right now? So that's an inner decision. I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just telling my story. So I get home that Friday, and I have the bag of mushrooms in my hand, and I have the 2.5 grams of mushrooms, but I'm too scared to take them all. I'm like, I'm gonna start with just like a small amount. So I start with 1 gram, and I'm like, am I supposed to be feeling something? How does this work? The first time you smoke weed or drink alcohol or take a psychedelic, you don't really know like what's gonna happen, and until you're actually in the trip, where then it's like unmistakable in terms of knowing that you're in the medicine or in the trip. But at that point, the first 45 minutes to an hour, I'm like, what is happening? And so I ended up like getting the desire to lay on the ground, and I laid on the ground, and I started to get really interesting visuals in my head, like a spiraling staircase. Which I look back now, that was like me beginning to understand the interconnectedness of all things. I understood, like, I didn't know this at the time because I hadn't studied any spirituality, I hadn't studied any quantum physics, I hadn't studied mysticism or philosophy or experienced it myself. And so I didn't know what was going on really, but I felt I was one little node in a infinitely 4-dimensional staircase of reality. And I saw myself as this like little particle of life for the first time, which was super new. And so I was starting to like feel it, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna take the rest. So I took the rest. So I ended up taking like 2 or 2.5 grams, and the next 3 to 4 hours were absolutely transformational. So what I did was, and again, I don't know why I did any of this. I didn't plan it. It was like my higher self or instinct or intuition, which I was not connected to really at that time. Like, I was a little bit. I never really lost my feminine side, like the emotional side. I was always emotional, and I was also always like kind of intuitive and could perceive things. But my intuition in that mushroom trip led me to start journaling. So I started journaling with the exact same prompt in mind that Marcus Aurelius, the former Roman emperor, starts his meditations with. And so the first book of meditations is Marcus Aurelius going through every single member in his family and every single person that influenced him in his life, like his dad, his grandfather, his teacher, his mentors, mother, whatever it was. And he basically said the character traits and qualities that he admired and learned from them. And so I did this for my family for the first time, and from like this different place of seeing. I wrote down my dad, my grandpa, my grandma, my other grandpa, my cousins, my mom, my aunt, my cousins, my sister, even my close childhood friends growing up. And I wrote down the character traits that I admired in all of them and the character traits I aspired to live up to. And so I think for my dad, I wrote like discipline and work ethic. For my grandpa, I wrote like loyalty and commitment. For my mom, I wrote like loving and nurturing. And for my friends, I would say different things depending on like what I admired about them. And for the first time, I was starting to experiment with the idea of creating my own character, of realizing, oh, these are the traits that I admire in other people. I can choose to embody them. I can choose to live up to these other character traits. And I also looked at the character traits I didn't want to embody in these other people in my life, whether it was anxiety, whether it was nerves, whether it was stress, whether it was anger. And I decided I didn't want to embody those traits. And so I started to create this self-concept of like, who could I be? Who could I be if I was living according to these values that I was noticing and admiring in other people? And so for the first time, I began to see myself and life in a much broader capacity than ever before. I was able to zoom out like never before. And I was able to realize, whoa, I'm 20 years old. Like a lot of the people I'm looking up to, whether it's Marcus Aurelius writing this book, whether it's Jordan Peterson, whether it's Andrew Huberman, all these guys are like 60 or 70 years old. Like my potential is not gonna be reached until I'm 60 or 70. I'm only 20. I can chill the fuck out and I can start to orient myself on a path so that I peak at 70 instead of peaking at 20 or 21 or 22, which is all I could see before playing football. I couldn't see what could life be beyond 22 because football was the only thing in my consciousness and awareness and self-identity. But with mushrooms dissolving a little bit of that barrier of self-identity, not to the point of ego death, I didn't take enough to understand that, and I didn't have the spiritual awareness, and I'm grateful I only took 2 or 2.5 grams, but I was able to step outside of the box I put myself in as football player in economics and an athlete and see myself as what could I be if I expanded the timeline 50 years and I picked a game that I could play for 70 years. Football was a game I could only play for another few years. I probably wasn't going to make the NFL, and I was coming to terms with that. But what's a game I could play for 50 more years? I could be a writer. That's interesting. I never had thought about being a writer before, but I was starting to journal and I was reading a lot. So like maybe that's a possibility. And so that kind of crossed my mind. And then just like becoming a leader and becoming a man and, you know, achieving peak health and physicality and all these things, I was like, I could be so much more if I dropped the label of football player. And so throughout the rest of that journey, you know, I was starting to come to peace with, I could be done with football. That's okay. I could be so much more than an athlete, but I never saw it before. And so the rest of the journey, a few other interesting things that I did, or my higher self led me to do, was I watched Harry Potter. I watched Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, so 7 Part 2, the last movie. And I was so fucking inspired by Harry Potter, and I still am to this day. Like, he's one of my tribe of mentors, like the people I look up to. I saw myself in him so much, for whatever reason, I'm like, I want to be like him. And something else that is clicking now that I didn't remember until now is the idea of the golden snitch. So Jordan Peterson talks about this idea of the golden snitch in his second 12 Rules for Life. I think it's called Beyond Order. And he talks about like the golden snitch being your highest self, or like the highest good or the highest achievement. I would even look at it now as like enlightenment. I don't think Peterson sees it like that, but I would. And what he talks about is like Harry, when he would go capture the snitch in Quidditch, in the game, in Hogwarts, he had to simultaneously play by the rules of the game. Like there's the bludgers and there's like the guys throwing the ball through the hoops, but there's another game within the game that is the real game, that ends all games if you can capture that, whatever that is. And that, I think, is your highest self. And so to capture that snitch, the golden snitch, Harry has to actually go outside of the stadium. You can see it in some of the movies. He actually goes underneath or outside of the stadium to catch the snitch. He has to break the rules or bend the rules of the game in order to achieve the highest self. And so I was thinking about this as I was watching the movie, and I was like, holy shit, like my highest self, it might be outside of the rules that society's told me about. And I never even had the awareness to think about the rules society told me about until I stepped out of it, thanks to mushrooms. So Harry Potter, that was really interesting to watch, and like the battle between good and evil. And, you know, Voldemort was bringing Hitler to my mind a lot. And I had this like intense desire to understand Hitler for the first time. I never had thought about him before, but I was like, I want to know. I want to understand, how could a human being, somebody who was an innocent child at some point, like me, end up causing so much mass chaos and so much destruction and go so deep into evil when he was just an 18-year-old kid who wanted to go to art school? How is that possible? So that got me really thinking, like, about the world and about good and evil, and about how we cast judgments on people when we don't know the truth of what happened. And now I'm not justifying Hitler's actions by any means, but I'm looking at him as the little child before it. How much did he have to go through to get to that point of causing this much mass chaos? So I was starting to think like that. I was starting to think about these crazy, crazy things. My mind was being liberated to really go wide for the first time. And it was beautiful. And I ended up watching another movie called Planet of the Apes. And I really connected with the character Caesar. Caesar's like the embodiment now. I see it as like the divine masculine leader. And at the time, I just loved his character. Like, he was the leader and he was strong, but he had emotions to him, and he was fair and he was just and he did what was right. And I really just connected with that energy of Caesar, and I saw myself in him. And I think we all do to some extent, right? It's why we love these movies. It's why we love Harry Potter. It's why we love Lord of the Rings and Bilbo Baggins going on the adventure. And it's why we love Caesar and Planet of the Apes. And it's why we love Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. It's because we see ourselves in them. And I saw myself in these characters, and I realized I could be like them, and I am like them if I choose to embody the traits that I see in them and in the family members and friends that I wrote down during those Marcus Aurelius meditations exercise. And so towards the end of this trip, I think it was starting to end, and I could sense it, and I ended up just laying on the ground with my dog for like a few hours, and seeing her on a different level, like as an equal in a way, as like just another being. And like we were so at peace together laying on the ground, and I was just watching her breathe, and it was just so fucking beautiful. And it was so beautiful. And I was changed forever. I was absolutely changed forever. Now, everything I learned during that journey, which I can't even remember all the details, but it wasn't like it was permanent change, right? I still had to go put in the work. But I gained the freedom, the internal freedom, the emotional freedom to say, I want to go create the life I want to. And I was starting to realize that. And so what I wanted in the present moment, actually, because I still didn't hear back from University of Chicago, I didn't know if I was going to transfer, it was still uncertain. I was like, what would it be like if I could just be a normal kid? If I could just be a normal student? And that's something I always craved as a kid. I like playing on these older sports teams or travel teams. I remember I'd always like say to my mom, I was like, I just want to be a normal kid sometimes. Like, I don't want to have all this pressure. I just want to be normal. And so I decided to go be normal that spring quarter. So this is spring quarter at Northwestern 2022 from like April to June. And I decided to leave the football team and leave football and retire from the game. And so this was a huge turning point for me, because I remember walking into my head coach's office, Coach Fitzgerald, right after that mushroom trip, probably within the same week, and my wide receiver coach, Coach Springer, his office as well. And for the first time in the 2 years I'd been there, I walked into their offices and I didn't feel nervous. I looked at them in the eyes and I said, I'm going to be done. I'm ready to move on. And there was nothing here. every other time I talked to them, my solar plexus would just like flare up. I was so fucking nervous. I'd be shaking. I'd be like, I have to say the right thing. At that point, I'd come to peace within myself that I wanted to be done. And so saying my truth to them felt easy. And that was the first time I didn't feel nervous talking to them. And that's how I knew it was true. That's how I knew what I was doing was the truth of what my soul wanted to experience. Also, around this time, I think it was after the mushroom trip, I ended up deciding to break up with this girlfriend, the lacrosse player girlfriend. And see, there's still some blocks here for me in my memory because like there was a lot of dissociation in these relationships around sexuality. But I remember just like feeling like I'm on this intense personal development journey right now. I'm getting into self-improvement. I just want to read. I just want to be with myself and work on myself and work out. And I feel like this relationship is taking me away from it. And so I ended up following my intuition and listening to it and breaking up with her. And it was hard, but it felt right. It felt so right. And that freed my consciousness up for so much more. So in this spring 2022, around April, I don't remember where this idea comes from. Maybe it comes from Matthew McConaughey's book of Green Lights, where he talks about like his adventures, and he took 6 months off of his acting career to ride motorcycles around Europe. And I think that could have been the seed of the idea, but I got this crazy idea for the first time in my life. And now I'm just full of crazy ideas, but for the first time in my life, I got the idea of, what if I didn't work an internship this summer, like a finance internship, like I'm supposed to, and I go backpack Europe with a friend or a few friends? What would that be like? So I think I ended up texting a few of my friends, but I called one of my friends, one of my best friends, Patrick. And for whatever reason, I had a feeling Patrick was going to be down for the idea. He's always been open-minded. He's always been curious. And he's always had this adventurous, rebellious type streak to him, and it's why we got along so well. And I called him one day, walking around Northwestern's campus that April, and I said, bro, I have a fucking crazy idea. And he's like, tell me. And I'm like, do you want to backpack Europe this summer? I get chills because like this was such a great time and a great like expansive moment in my life. And he's like, yeah, I'm down, let's do it. And from there, we started planning it. And I think we got on the phone the next week. I remember I was supposed to be studying for a test, and he was too. But we got on the phone, and I'm in the study room, and we're looking up flights to Rome. Why Rome? I don't know. I was taking a Roman history class at that time, and I was starting to really get into it because now I wasn't playing football. So my intelligent, nerdy side that had been suppressed was coming out of me. And so I was like, dude, let's go to Rome. And so we ended up booking those flights. We booked a flight to Rome on June 13th. You know what's interesting? June 13th was the same day that I think I got to college football 2 years prior. And now June 13th was the day we were going to fly to Rome. And we had a flight to Rome booked, and we had a flight home from Barcelona booked August 1st. So we had 50 days, I think it was exactly 50 days, and nothing planned in between other than we had 2 days at an Airbnb in Rome. And then from there, we were like, we're going to figure it out. So this was really the start of my surrender experiment. And my life beyond that has really been a surrender experiment. And if you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, there's a great book by Michael Singer called The Surrender Experiment, which is basically the story of his life, how he surrendered his personal preferences to God and to the universe, and he ended up living this crazy life, building a retreat center, building $1 billion software business. And I didn't read the book yet, but I was starting to live the surrender experiment. And so we get to Rome, or I'll finish out spring quarter. Spring quarter was one of the best times of my life. Even to this day, it was one of the greatest times of my life. And sometimes I look back on it if I'm starting to feel stressed or if I'm not happy, and I look back at that and I'm like, why was I so happy there? And it was because I had the freedom to be nobody. I had the freedom to just be a kid. I had the freedom to have no pressure on myself and just do what I wanted. And so during that spring, I started taking school pretty seriously. I really liked my classes, Roman history, some other history classes, some psychology classes. I think it was around this time that I was thinking about switching my major to psychology too from economics, which was another big internal leap, because everybody was like, you should get an economics degree because it will get you this type of job. But I eventually end up changing that later the next year. But that spring quarter, I remember just like starting to fall in love with myself. Starting to fall in love with spending time with myself. I remember friends would want to go out and party, and for the first time, I would say no. I'd say, no, I'm going to smoke a joint, I'm going to go on a run, I'm going to go to Chipotle, and I'm going to walk around campus by myself and maybe listen to a podcast or just like look at the trees. And I'm so proud of that version of myself, that 20-year-old version of myself, for like having the intuition and the confidence to do that and start to be okay with being with myself. Now, I think it went a little bit far at one point where I became somewhat of a recluse. Like, I really spent a lot of time with myself, but it was all perfect and needed. And I remember there would be times where, like, I would be riding my bike around campus and listening to beautiful music in the sun and just, like, laughing with joy. Just, like, I love this campus, I love my classes, I love life. And the difference between that and like how I felt playing football was crazy. And I felt so liberated to just be nobody. And from that place of being nobody, I could become who I truly was. I need to make that a tweet or something. I'll write it down. Okay. I also start hanging out with some new friends at this point. Like, I'm not hanging out with my athlete friends as much. And I start hanging out with this girl. But again, like, she was super beautiful. She was this tall girl, psychology. I met her in the gym. And she was a big smoker. And I was starting to smoke at that point because I was like, I'm not a football player. I can smoke. I mean, I already was smoking. I was already smoking, but it was in a different way now, where I used to just be smoking to like play video games with my friends, but now I was smoking to like have deep philosophical conversations with people and go on walks around campus and read philosophical books. So this was like a big shift as well. And so I started to hang out with this girl. We would like smoke bongs at her house and we'd smoke with her friends, and it was super fucking cool. And I don't know if there was ever romantic interest. I mean, there probably was a desire for it for me, but again, I was probably too nervous to pursue it. But she's so cool. She's a homie. If she's listening, you know who you are. Maybe. So yeah, we end up going to Rome June 13th, and like 2 days before, I think it was like June 10th or June 11th, I finished my last exam of that quarter, and it was Roman history. And I was obsessed with that class. I was learning about Commodus, I was learning about Marcus Aurelius, I was learning about Constantinople, Julius Caesar, and all these different people. I mean, my memory's not as good now, but it was so fucking cool finishing that class and within 3 to 5 days being in Rome and seeing the statues of the people I had just learned about. I thought that was so fucking cool. And so, you know, as we arrived to Rome, it was great that I was with my friend at this time, because like if I was alone, I would have been super overwhelmed. It's a lot going to a new country by yourself where it's like not English, and I never had traveled before other than to San Francisco once. And we get there and it's like, whoa, we can't read anything. We have to take a train. Where the fuck is our hostel? How are we going to get here? I remember just like walking around and like not knowing where to go. And we got there and we ended up like outside of the Coliseum somehow, like kitty corner from the Coliseum. And we like got a pizza and we were drinking Roman beers. And it was like, holy shit, we're actually here. And so we end up moving into this like co-living hostel Airbnb with like 6-7 other people. And it just so happened to be like 5 to 6 other girls from around the world. There was a girl from Russia, there was a girl from Germany, there was a girl from Italy, there was a girl from the United States, and they invited us in so graciously. They cooked dinner for us. We all cooked dinner together. We were drinking wine, and it was like, wow, this is incredible. And there was one girl particularly Her name's Jill. And I remember she walked in the room and I was like, whoa, like, is this my wife? She's just absolutely beautiful and such an angel and a sweetheart. And she went out of her way to tour me and Patrick around the entire city of city of Rome, and show us all the great spots. And she just treated us like we were family, even though we just met her. And we ended up going out, like clubbing. I never had gone clubbing before. And we ended up going like clubbing and dancing. And I like was still really self-conscious about dancing, but I was like, could kind of get into it. But there was this other guy named Vlad from Russia who was in our friend group. And he had the craziest fucking dance moves I ever saw. And I'm like, how is somebody that free? I didn't know at the time, like, what does being free mean? But I was looking at him like, there's something special about this guy. And then a funny story was we were at that club in Rome for the first time, and a few interesting things happened to me. A guy came up to me and he's like, are you gay? I'm like, no. He's like, oh, fuck, I wish. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then a girl came up to me and she said, are you gay? And I was like, no. Like, why does this keep happening? And then she just starts making out with me. And I was like, what the fuck is life right now? This is so different than what I'm used to. And another subtle reason I went to Europe, which I haven't stated yet, was the desire to explore sexually and be free sexually. So I had this like master plan of, once I get to Europe, I can just be free to like have sex with whoever I want. But what I would come to learn is that you take yourself everywhere. And so even though I was across the world and nobody knew me, I mean, I was around my friends, so there was still that. But I was so self-conscious to the point where I was like, I still can't do this. And so that progressed throughout the rest of the trip. Even though that was kind of looming, I was still having like the time of my life and it was so great, but that was still there of like, I really want to get over this sexual thing, but I don't know how. And the next place we went to was Florence. Florence was dope. We went clubbing again. There was one night we went clubbing until like 3 a.m. and we both somehow wandered home drunk like 2 miles to our place, and we stayed in this super old, like quaint Airbnb, and there was these giant fucking bugs in there that we had to get out. We were like drinking wine and listening to classical music at 20 years old. I think Patrick was 19 still. Yeah, he was 19 still, and I was 20, and we're like drinking wine in our Airbnb, listening to classical music and like wandering the streets of Florence and eating gelato. What a time. It was so beautiful. We kept hopping around from there. We went to Venice, which was cool, but kind of underwhelming. Then we went to Milan, which was cool. We actually ended up meeting with some girls from high school in Milan, which was fun. And that felt like kind of an interesting synchronicity. Synchronicities were starting to happen, but I didn't know what that was yet. And we ended up taking a day trip to Lake Como. I think that Patrick's mom like bought us a hotel and a train ticket or something, and she's like, you guys should go to Lake Como. So we take the train there, and we'd ride with this girl named Clarence or something like this girl from like Mississippi. And she was cool. Like, we just chatted for an hour, and she went off on her own journey, and she was going to explore Lake Como by herself. And about exactly 2 years later, or maybe it was a year later, I'm sitting at a cafe in Costa Rica, and I see her sitting there. This was a girl from Mississippi I saw in Italy on a train, and now I see her at the same cafe in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica. So life is just incredible. Like, these synchronicities they're never ending, especially now. It's like everything is just a synchronicity. But after Lake Como, and Lake Como was like incredible, so freeing, the mountains, hiking. I loved Lake Como. I ate horse, which was like kind of fucked and disgusting, but I did it anyways. That felt wrong, honestly. But after Lake Como, we went back to Milan, and then we took a flight or a train to Zurich and did another hike. And Zurich was interesting, and it was fun being in Switzerland, and that city was cool. And it was funny because Lake Zurich, the town I'm from, I was like looking at the real Lake Zurich in Switzerland as I was from Lake Zurich, Illinois. And after that, me and Patrick decided to split. So we decided to split, I think it was July 4th, 2022. And he went east to Germany and like had a great time over there. And I went southwest all the way down to Sevilla, Spain. This was a crazy fucking journey. So I was by myself for the first time. And like, I took a flight to Barcelona and I had to take a train from Barcelona all the way down to the southern tip of Spain called Sevilla. And that was a wild fucking journey. And I made it, and I got to my place, and I was alone, and I had 12 days. And so 12 days, it's an interesting number for many reasons. One, the date I'm recording this video right now is 12-12-24. Very powerful date for many reasons, which we won't get into in this video. Two is that I'm here in Hawaii for 12 days as well, for like a solo retreat. I'm in a very different internal state than I was in Sevilla 3 summers ago. 3.5 summers ago, wow. And I got that idea again from Matthew McConaughey, from his walkabout in the book Green Lights. So I wanted to do this 12-day retreat to just like go into myself. And what I wanted to do was like, again, how did I know this stuff? I don't know. It was like my higher self knew and was leading me there, or my intuition was leading me there. But I wanted to get to the bottom of all of the sexual stuff by myself. And so I remember sitting there and like writing forgiveness letters to every single girl that I had hurt. And like I was writing every situation that I had sexual performance anxiety in. But the thing I didn't know at that point was how to release and forgive it, like through unconditional love or through quantum healing or through somatics or through the body, which I'm doing now. But at the time, I just wrote all of them down. And I just didn't know what to do with it. And I would just sit with it. And, you know, it all happened perfectly. But if I would have known, I could have released all this stuff way earlier. But I didn't. But I was willing to look. I was willing to look. One other thing that's coming up is the day before we went to Europe, I did mushrooms again with my 2 best friends. And that was when I started to realize I think I'm meant to be a philosopher, which is like this video, right? Like just speaking. And I was just rambling for hours about like philosophy and like, oh my God, the ant is just on this rock and we're just like ants on this rock of like the earth. And like, oh my God, we're so young, and like starting to be a philosopher, which then led to things happening in Europe that led me to now making a video now. So in Sevilla, I end up doing my first 3-day fast to like test myself, and I do 1 day with no technology and no stimulation. And I think I didn't tell my parents that I was gonna do this, and they were freaking the fuck out. Like I had my phone off, so they like couldn't find me on Find My iPhone. I wasn't responding, and I'm sorry guys, that was not wise. But at the same time, it's like I was on my journey, and that was good for them to realize I'm not always going to be responsive and I can still be okay. But I did that 1 day technology detox, and I was just like, oh my God, while I was fasting, and that was really tough. And during the 3-day fast, I was just like drinking Coke Zeros and like I was watching Peaky Blinders on Netflix, and I was watching YouTube podcasts to like try to pass the time, and I was sleeping so much because I just wanted it to be over. But I had to get myself through it because I was still in that mindset of like coming from force rather than love. So during that 3-day fast, I find a podcast from Joe Rogan that again changes my life. The podcast is with a man called Naval Ravikant, an angel investor, philosopher, entrepreneur. And so he starts talking about all these concepts of like, you will not get rich renting out your time. You need to own a part of a business to create your financial freedom. You give the world, I really want to rewatch this video now. You give the world what it wants but doesn't know how to get yet. Like all these crazy ideas that I never heard. And like I really like this guy's mindset around business, around life, around freedom, around wealth. And it got me thinking. It got me thinking about what could I do to be free, financially free, to not have to work a job. So my mind was starting to get into this mindset of like, what could I do outside the box? So that led me to leaving Sevilla. And one more story from Sevilla is I was running a lot at this time. I was training for a half marathon. And I'm going to turn these lights on really quick. All right, thanks for waiting for me. That's better. So I'm training for like a half marathon at this point, and even during my fast, I'm still running like 5 miles a day in like the fucking crazy sun. It was like 114 degrees there, Fahrenheit, during the day, which Celsius might be like 40, 45 or something. And I remember I was so fucking relieved to finish that fast that I went down the street to this kebab place that I liked, and I ate like 2 huge chicken kebabs, and I decided to go on a run after. So dumb. And I run like 3-4 miles all the way into the city because my Airbnb was like way outside of the city. So I run into the city and I get this intense feeling like I need to shit so bad and I don't know what to do. And I'm at a crosswalk. I'm like looking, there's a cafe across the street. I'm like, I gotta get in. And I couldn't hold it anymore, and I ended up shitting my pants, like, while waiting to cross the street in the city of Sevilla. Luckily, nobody knew, nobody could tell, but I, like, waddled my way into the bathroom, and that was really funny. That was the first of, I think, 2 times that happened. Another time happens in San Francisco was actually God telling me to not go do something, which that'll be maybe next video, actually. Shitting my pants in San Francisco rather than Sevilla, Spain. Hasn't happened since. I've been good. I figured some stuff out. But so after Sevilla, I end up taking a train to Madrid. And so in Madrid, there are some girls there that Patrick and I hung out with back in Switzerland, which I didn't touch on for whatever reason. We went to Interlaken, Switzerland for a few days and hiked and with 2 girls, and it was amazing, and these girls were pretty cute, and Patrick liked one and I kind of liked the other, but again, I wasn't confident enough to go it, like pursue it or say it. But we were homies and we were good friends, and they were in Madrid for a study abroad, and so they had an apartment that they shared with another girl, and they were like, you can stay with us in Madrid. So I planned it so that I would I went from Switzerland to Sevilla, and Sevilla to Madrid. And so in Madrid, I stayed at this apartment with like 5 girls. And it was pretty fucking fun. I never hung out with girls on that level. And this was me maybe starting to like connect more with the feminine inside of myself. But we're like watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And I'm like, this is actually kind of a good time. I kind of like this. And so we end up going clubbing in Madrid. I see a friend named Tom in the club in Madrid from college. Like, what the fuck? Again, another synchronicity. And I had a great 4 days there hanging out with those girls. And, you know, it's interesting being like the one guy at like the party or the pregame and the hangout with 7 girls. And usually that guy is the gay dude who like is just there hanging out, one of the girls. But I was still like, I was attracted to them, but like I didn't want to pursue it. I didn't know. There was one girl who was sitting on my lap. There was another girl who liked me, but again, I didn't pursue anything because I was too nervous and insecure. This forms a big theme in my life. I now realize I also just wasn't in my heart. Like the desires weren't coming from my heart, which now is like I won't pursue anything unless it's from the heart space, not the lower spaces. But Madrid was dope, and the train ride from Madrid to Paris, so I was making my way all the way back up to Amsterdam to meet my friend a few weeks later. And the train ride from Madrid to Paris is when I wrote my first newsletter. This was me for the first time listening to a sign and taking action on it. So what I believe happened was I was listening to an audiobook from my mentor at the time, Jim, called Linchpin, like how to become so valuable in your company and organization that people like can't help but paying you and listening to you. And so in that book by Seth Godin, he mentioned some idea about like the only reason you aren't sharing your creations or your art with the world is because you're scared of what people are going to think of you. And at this point, I'd been journaling so much during the trip. I'd written like 200 pages, handwritten, in a journal about my experiences. And so the idea popped in my mind. Again, ideas are starting to pop more in my mind because my awareness is more open. Travel, psychedelics, smoking weed, meeting people from all over the world, sitting with myself for 12 days in Spain. All these things contributed to it. But the idea pops in my mind of like, what if I shared a newsletter to people? What if I shared something with people? And on that train ride, I wrote the first ever newsletter that I sent to anybody. And it was called The Weekend Drift. And it was a sensation or phenomenon I felt in my life where I'd be super disciplined the first 4 days of the week, and then towards the end of the week, I'd like fall off the wheel and lose momentum. And so I called that sensation like the weekend drift. And I think I heard it maybe from Andrew Huberman or something, but I end up writing that newsletter. Oh, another key point here on that train ride is I was sitting across, facing in a table, this kid named Fadicio from Florence. And he was an artist. He was a 19-year-old artist from Florence. And he was posting his art on Instagram, and he was just obsessed with art. And the insight was, he introduced himself to me as an artist because he was doing art. And I was sitting there writing the whole time. So I introduced myself to him as a writer. I was like, wait, whoa. I just said that. Or I'm starting to think this about myself. And it was the same insight that happened back on that mushroom journey of like, what's a game I could play for the next 50 years? Oh, being a writer. So then I start to realize, oh, this dude is doing art and he's calling himself an artist. I'm writing, I can call myself a writer. And this insight from the book, I could share it with the world. And so I write this first newsletter, and I get to my crazy journey to get to my new Airbnb, like 13 miles outside of Paris. I got there at like 4 a.m. I had to walk like 3 miles. That was tough. That was hard. I have a video. I'm like, I don't know why the fuck I'm here. It was tough. But so I get there, and I end up sending that newsletter. I think I like set up a WordPress website somehow, and like I set up a Beehive account maybe. I don't remember exactly. The specifics aren't that important. But I set up some type of email, and I started collecting people's emails in like a Google Sheet or like a Google Doc. And so what I did is I think I texted like 30 of my friends and family, and I said, this is how I sent the message. I said, hey, this is like super fucking weird, but I want to start writing a weekly newsletter. Would you want to receive it? And I think like 15 people said yes, and like 5 people said no. And like some of my friends were like, nah, bro, I don't want to get your emails. Or like, nah, I don't want to receive any emails. I'm feeling so much tension here. Why? I'm gonna pause this. Yo, so the last video I ended up cutting off because I was getting this very strong sensation, and you could see the last few minutes of the video, like in the right side of my head, like something was pulling me. My right temple was like really strongly pulsating, and then I took out my AirPod, and like my right ear was opening and expanding. And we're gonna get into all this way later in the series, but like my body is so attuned to every little subtle hint from the universe right now that's like pulling me in certain directions. It's what led me to make this video series. But last night I was feeling this, and you could see for a minute I'm kind of ignoring it because I'm in the flow of the story and I wanted to keep telling. But at one point it was like, I got to figure out what this is. And I kept hearing from the birds, like, go now, go now, go now. And I ended up driving downtown to go get food, or so I thought. And I ended up driving by a church with, like, a big event going on. And at this event, like, I had a lot of incredible realizations about religion and God, and it was a really interesting experience. Then I went to a pizza shop, and this woman opened up and told me her life story about how she, like, had this magical experience where she gifted, like, 10,000 Bibles to Russia, and it was just really, really wild. And I was practicing the art of non-attachment with that video of, I can leave and I can go forget about this for now, and I trust I'll come back to it when the time's right. So now the time's right. Now let's dive back into the story. So I ended the last video talking about the first newsletter I wrote, and how a handful of friends were like, nah, don't send it to me, and a handful of people were like, yeah, send it to me. And some of those early friends that supported it, and family members that supported it, people that come to mind are my Aunt Christine. She was, like, such a big reader, and she'd always reply. My grandma Mo would always reply. My dad would always reply. Justin Quast, a really good friend, would always reply, and a handful of other friends would, like, be like, yeah, like, I like what you're doing, it's cool. And that gave me a little bit of courage and motivation to keep going. And so I would send a newsletter every week. And for whatever reason, I don't know how I found this guy on Instagram. I just kind of liked what he was posting. I liked his writing. I didn't have any idea that I could try to be like him someday, but not yet. But his name was Dakota Robertson. And for whatever reason, that July, before I started writing really on Twitter or anything, I just sent him a newsletter, and I was like, yo, bro, what do you think of this? And of course he didn't respond, and this guy is like has a couple 100,000 followers, and now I know him, but at the time, like, just some random kid on Instagram texting him, yo, you should read this, or like, what do you think about this, or how could I improve this? And looking back, that's a very funny message that I sent, that it was ignorance. And I think, like, to take leaps into higher versions of reality, we have to be ignorant enough to look stupid at times. And so that message is kind of dumb, but it's okay, it is what it is. And so those two guys, actually, Dakota Robertson and Justin Quast, great friend from high school who's always been supporting these newsletters, they come full circle a few months later. But I'm going to wait for that. That's the next episode about the creator economy. So let's finish out this one. So after Paris, like, was kind of insignificant. I just spent like a day walking around by myself, and then I had to catch a train to Amsterdam. And this is when I met back up with Patrick. And I fell in love with life in Amsterdam even deeper, and the whole experience of traveling. And Amsterdam was the first place where I remember saying to Patrick and thinking to myself, holy shit, like, maybe I'd want to be a digital nomad. Like, I would love to maybe work a remote job and live here. And for whatever reason, I just it felt like home there. I think it was the weed. I loved, like, we'd wake up, and Patrick didn't really smoke, but, like, once in a while he would smoke, and, like, we would go to these bars, and in Amsterdam, the cool thing is you can smoke inside everywhere. So we'd go to a cafe, and, like, these places were so fucking cool, and it gave me a vision of, like, I would love to open one of these type of shops one day, and I still would. I don't know where, I don't know when. This is just an intention I'm putting into the universe. Someday, if it's supposed to happen, allow it to happen. But they have these cool cafes called Bulldogs, where you go in and you can order, like, a cappuccino and a joint over the counter and a burger. It was insane. And, like, it was such a cool sitting area. You would go in and chill and smoke joints and drink coffees. And, like, I'd wake up at 7 a.m. and go get a joint and a coffee. And, like, during that time, it was so chill. Like, nothing was going on. We had 4 days there, and I just loved it. And we rode bikes around the city. We ended up laying in the park one day. I remember we FaceTimed our parents from that park. Beautiful park. And it opened my eyes and my mind to the possibility of living somewhere outside of the United States for the first time. So after Amsterdam, we end up going to London and the UK. Also, one more thing about Amsterdam was the red light district, like, really freaked me out and turned me off. And if you don't know what the red light district is, basically it's like, because Amsterdam is so free and open liberally, like, they sell mushrooms, basically, they sell weed everywhere. There's also, like, hookers and prostitutes, like, in the windows, like within bikinis or like bras and dogs and stuff, and like you can go pay to go have sex with them, and like that just, I mean, there was a part of me that's like, yeah, I want to try and do this, but there was a whole other part of me that was like, one, I'm way too scared. Two, this just feels so fucking weird and wrong. It's like we're in a museum and we're putting a human being behind a window and we can pay for another human being. It just felt really weird. But Amsterdam also had a lot of other innovative things. They had like a McDonald's-like burger place where it was like a vending machine of burgers, so you didn't even have to talk to anybody. You could click a button and a burger just came out. I was like, wow, there was some very futuristic things there, and also some like dystopian things there, which I guess come together, right? So after that, we go to the UK, we go to London, and I end up meeting my aunt and her CEO in like an underground bar in London, which was super cool, and we were like drinking old fashions with them, and that was a fun time. Other than that, London was kind of insignificant. I think we were at the point where we were kind of getting ready to go home. We were getting ready to leave. And I just remember running around the city. I was running a lot still at this time, and I would just run around the city. And we were still living in separate places, like separate Airbnbs. But yeah, we were getting to the point where it's like, yeah, we're kind of ready. We're ready to go back. And so then we flew all the way down to Barcelona because our flight was on August 1st that we had planned. So the whole plan was somehow make it to Barcelona August 1st. And I think Patrick and I differed a little bit because he was actually able to be more open and free-flowing and spontaneous than I was. I had some other obligations. Like I was taking this Spanish class 3 hours a day, which I haven't mentioned, but I took Spanish pretty much every day from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., which kind of sucked, but like it still didn't hinder my ability to go do that summer, but it did limit my ability to be as open and free-flowing and spontaneous as Patrick, and I think that's why we ended up splitting. It's a big reason why we split in the middle of the trip, because he didn't want to plan everything, and I was getting anxious about not having a plan, because like one day in Venice, like we arrive in Venice, we're getting off a boat, the water taxi, and my class is starting, and I'm like jumping off the boat, running into the hostel, trying to get on the Zoom. It was crazy. But it was fun, but it was fucking crazy. And so that's why I was like, I need a plan. And so I planned the rest of my trip in a Google Doc. And then he ended up being super free-flowing and open. And now I would love, like if I'm going to go do a backpacking trip again at some point, I'd love just being open and spontaneous, kind of like I am here right now in Hawaii, or like I was in Thailand. But at the time I had that commitment, and so it made me get a little bit more structured, which was okay. But that was a reason why we ended up splitting. After that, we go to Barcelona, and Barcelona was also great. I loved it. I ran 10 miles for the first time in Barcelona. I remember running around the city and getting to 10 miles, and like that was tough, but I got it. And just eating a ton of paella and smoking weed. We found this like underground, well, Patrick wasn't really smoking, but I met some guy on the street who's like, gave me a card. He's like, yo, go to this place. We have an underground weed smoking place. You can go smoke there. Because it wasn't legal there, I think. But I found it and I went in and chilled, and that was really fun too. And we were intending to fly home August 1st. And so here's where kind of the story takes another left turn, is we get to the airport and the flight is delayed. And so at first it's like, okay, the flight's delayed, that's okay. The flight's delayed by 5 days. The flight got delayed until August 5th. And so we were kind of like, what the fuck? I was feeling pretty calm actually at this point. I felt pretty stoic. I was like, okay, cool. I was reading a ton of Stoic philosophy at this point. So like this felt like a perfect opportunity to practice it. Patrick was a little bit upset, which like it makes sense. Getting a flight delayed by 5 days, and I think he was really ready to go back home. Like we've been out there for a long time, and he also was like super low on money, which is another funny story about the airport when we actually leave. But we end up getting put into like this super high-end hotel outside of the city of Barcelona for 5 days for free. And so it was interesting timing because my birthday was August 3rd. And so I wasn't going to be home for my birthday. And I was originally intending to be back home for my birthday, and my family was intending it. And I was just like, I was at peace with it. I was like, okay, this is supposed to happen. It's all good. So we got into that hotel, and honestly, like, this was a time where I was ready to get like super disciplined again. I was just writing all the time. I was reading all the time. I was working out, going on runs, walking, and I was like, I'm ready to be disciplined. And Patrick was feeling the same way. I have a picture of Patrick in my phone. He's riding on this like stationary bike in the hotel, like with his computer, like applying for jobs or something funny like that. So we were both like ready to get back to the grind a little bit after like so much spontaneity and freedom. And so on my 21st birthday, this is when I realized I'm not fucking normal. We end up going into Barcelona, and I think Patrick's like, dude, it's your birthday. Like, what do you want to do today? Like, and I was like, honestly, bro, I just want to go eat some paella, maybe smoke a little weed, and have a smoothie, and that's it. And usually the 21st birthday is like, go out, drink, like you're finally legal in America. But I already felt legal all the whole summer because the drinking age is 18 in Europe, which was awesome. So like 21 didn't feel significant for drinking and partying purposes, but it felt significant for turning the chapter into manhood for me at the time and like getting on a mission and getting on a purpose, which is about to come in about a month. So we end up flying back August 5th. Another couple crazy magical things happen in the airport. One is that I see my high school football coach in the airport in Portugal. Like, what? I see my high school defensive back coach, Coach Williams, in the airport with his family. And he's like, Moses O'Malley, Patrick's last name. It's like, what the fuck are you guys doing here? We're like, what are you doing here? So that was funny. We were on the same flight home from Portugal as my high school football coach. Just crazy, right? How life is like that. And then the last thing with Patrick, and I think he wouldn't mind me sharing it because it's so funny. We were both running pretty low on money at this point. I went with like $7,000 or $8,000 for those 2 months, and I think he went with around the same. And I had about like $300 to $500 left in my bank account as we're like leaving to go home, and I think he ended up having like $7. And we're getting one last meal at the airport before getting on our flight to go home. And Patrick tries to get like an Egg McMuffin or something from McDonald's, and his card gets declined. And so that was like a really funny little story to end it. It's like, wow, we literally made it back with nothing, not even to the point of being able to get McDonald's. So I paid for his McDonald's, and we ended up getting on the flight and going home. And what a magical journey and a magical trip. And I definitely came home changed. I came home wearing something like this. I came home with longer hair than ever, probably like about what it's at now. And like my family had never seen my hair that long, even this long. It's like, I mean, to you out there, you're watching, you're like, it's not long. But for me, it's long. And for my family, it's long. And I think one of the first things my parents said were like, you need to get a haircut. And I did, like, which, you know, it's interesting. I felt so free and open out there, and then right when I get back, it's like, okay, back to kind of my old self. But as a changed person, most definitely. So I come home changed. I remember going to a dinner with my family, and I was just like, this is so different. I'm eating my food super slow. I like eat over the course of an hour, and I'm like, this is what we did in Europe. Like, we took things really slow rather than just like scarfing our food down. So I was different, and I was about to go to school again at Northwestern early to become an RA. So an RA means residential assistant, and so I lived in the dorms as a junior so that I didn't have to pay rent and save my family some money. That was always an intention for me because my dad and my mom, mainly my dad, was gracious enough to pay for my education, and so I was always trying to find little ways to save him money, and the RA job seemed like a great idea. And plus, I think I got some money from it, or like, I got free housing and free food, and I think I got a little bit of a stipend, like $500 a quarter, which is like nothing. But I went to school early around August, I don't know, 10th. School started September 21st and I went like August 10th. So I went within like a week of getting back from Europe. And again, I'm very changed. And here's when things start to really shift in terms of my life trajectory and career path. So I get there and I end up moving into this dorm and I have a lot of free time on my hands. And this same guy that I was following on Instagram, Dakota Robertson, who I sent my newsletter to the previous month, I get curious enough to look up one of his podcasts on YouTube. I look up Dakota Robertson, and I find this podcast with like 1,000 views between him and a guy named Dan Coe. And that's where the story ends for now. So if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. I love you so much. I have so much gratitude for anybody who's invested in this story. It's so cool. Send me a text if you did, or send me a message somewhere. And yeah, the next episode will be about the creator economy. So until then, sending you so much love. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.